Hello everyone and welcome back to the video. Today we're going to be doing another deep dive analysis of Pro Age of Empires, and this time we're going to be talking about a strategy that was very popular back in the day, especially for underdogs, that these days is basically seeing no play in tournaments, and that strategy is the tower rush. Now there are all kinds of tower rushes that you can expect to see in pro play and that we used to see like back in the day, meaning 3-4 years ago, and then obviously way longer than that, like 10 years ago, the similar strategies were being applied. But 3-4 years ago, there was a few very popular versions of tower rushing, and that is the pure tower rush, which is basically going up as fast as possible to the feudal age and sending like 7 to 8 vills forward and then only doing towers forward. You have no military to defend it, and your goal was to get up way faster than your opponents and be able to set up some towers before he's able to really respond. Then you can use your villagers to break down his building. Like if you made a stable, you can tower near it, kill the stable, the villagers, and continue chaining your towers all around his base until you can eventually win. The next version of the tower rush that was pretty popular back in the day as well was the spear skirm tower rush. This is the oldest version of the tower rush. This one has seen play for basically decades at this point, and that is to go forward with 4 villagers usually at a pretty fast uptime, and we want to make a barracks and a range forward near our opponent's base. Then we're going to go ahead and make spearmen and skirmishers to harass our opponent, and then also follow that up with some towers. So you make your initial tower, then you start mining stone, and then you can continue chaining towers similar to the pure tower rush approach. This time though, you've got skirms and spears that follow it up. The reason why this is very popular and pretty strong is because skirms and spears don't really have a good counter in feudal age. Like there's not a single unit that counters both skirms and spears, so your opponent is basically forced to either go scouts and then into skirms to have a composition that can beat you, or they've got to go something like skirms themselves and then hope to outmass you. And it's not exactly clear how to defend this if you don't scout it. And then the next version of the tower rush, and this is the last that I have as a popular version of a tower rush, is the men-at-arms plus towers. This is pretty simple. You go 3 men-at-arms or 4 men-at-arms, and then you also send 4 villagers forward. You up at a reasonable time, and then you go for a very aggressive push near your opponent's gold, wood, or berries, and your goal is to force him to fight your men-at-arms, because if he doesn't, you get a very aggressive tower right outside his base. This version of the tower rush is pretty fragile because if he responds correctly, you don't really have a good follow-up since you don't have a second building right off the bat. You invested all your resources into the men-at-arms, but it's also the most powerful version of the tower rush because if the men-at-arms are able to hit villagers and you're able to get an aggressive tower as well, that could mean instantly winning the game. Like you could easily win within 12 to 15 minutes. It's a very strong, very aggressive rush. So what happened to these 3 versions of the tower rush? Why is it that these days in tournaments, if you just watch all the recent tournaments, we don't see these strategies executed nearly as much? And in fact, the higher level you go, the further up the rankings list in tournaments that you go, the less and less you see these tower rushes. Now let's go ahead and talk about some of the things and some of the changes that happened in the past few years that completely discouraged players from going for this strategy. So the number one thing that needs to be talked about as to why we don't see tower rushing these days in tournaments is the fact that there's been some direct and indirect nerfs to the towers. Let's talk about the direct nerf to the tower itself now. It costs an extra 25 wood to make the tower. A lot of people might not know this, but the tower used to cost 125 stone and 25 wood. Now it costs 50 wood a piece. And that change was made, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, either with the release of DE or just before. And then they also reduced the HP or the hit points of the tower. That was recently increased a little bit, but it doesn't have the full 1020 HP that it has in Castle Age for the Watchtower. In Feudal Age, it has like around like 800 something. I don't know the exact number, but it has around 800 HP, and it was at 720 HP until like 6 months ago or a year ago where they bumped it up a little bit more. Obviously, back in the day, 4 or 5 years ago, it had 1020 HP right from the get-go in the Feudal Age, and that was a big advantage to someone who's tower rushing. So these 2 nerfs to the tower itself were a pretty big deal. Also, they nerfed some of the very strong bonuses that certain tower rushing civilizations had. Koreans underwent a few nerfs that completely destroyed their tower rush or completely nerfed their tower rush. They no longer get the extra range in Castle Age for free on their guard tower, and so their rush is nowhere near as strong as it once was. And then Incas lost the blacksmith upgrades impacting villagers in Feudal Age, which allowed them to villager and tower rush in Feudal Age, and so those strategies were heavily nerfed to the ground. And so combining the indirect nerfs to the civilizations and the direct nerfs to the tower, I mean, there's just very little left to the tower rush. However, there's actually more that discouraged players from going for the strategy. The next reason why players don't go for this is the fact that it's a very risky strategy, which is completely okay, but it's the fact that players got better at scouting it that makes it even more risky. Back in the day, or like a few years ago, let's say, the players, yes, they were really good, but there was holes in the game. The game was not as perfected or as far along as it is now. I'm not saying we're playing perfectly now at the highest level, but we're playing way better than we did a few years ago. Our scouting patterns all increased. We're luring deers much faster. We're scouting at the right locations. The maps also became a little bit more scripted in the sense that the players are always spawning in a certain area away from you, so it's easier to find your opponent. It's easier to know where to scout, and scouting the tower rush is a lot more likely nowadays because the players got way better than they were before. And if you scout the tower rush and you see the villagers coming forward, it's basically 10 times easier to defend, and it becomes a harder strategy to pull off for your opponent. The next reason, another reason why the tower rush is much harder to pull off nowadays, is the fact that players are naturally going up to the feudal age much faster. Think of it this way, back in the day, 20 pop feudal age was considered fast. 22 pop was considered standard for a scout rush. So if you're going for a 19 pop forward with towers or with the spear skirm tower rush, then all of a sudden you're much faster than your opponent. You have time to set up the towers. Now we got maniacs going 18 pop scouts, and that is normal. That is what you expect to see in most Arabia games at the highest level. Other maps, they might even go up around the same or a little faster depending on the resources that they get. Certain civs like Mongols can go up 16 pop if they wanted to. And so you can't go much faster if you're tower rushing. Like you could do like 17 pop, but then you're really sacrificing your economy. You're very fragile, and you're only 1 pop faster than the scout rush or the archer rush. And so there's just less time for you to set up the towers, and it's just not the same window that you once had. And then the last reason as to why it's a lot harder to make the tower rush work is the fact, and it's gonna sound stupid, but it's true, there's a lot less lag nowadays. Before, we had a player-to-player, this is before Definitive Edition came out, we had a player-to-player connection. So if one guy's in China and one guy's in Canada, that's 350 ping guaranteed. Now we have a server that's placed in the middle of us, so if I'm playing in Canada and I'm playing Mr. Yo in China, let's say we use a West US server, and that's gonna be like 200 ping for both of us. So way less lag across the board, and lag benefits towers. Why? If there's a messy fight and there's a tower involved, you have to decide if you want to commit to try to deny the tower or go back. Like you have to decide like half a second in advance if there's a lot of lag, and that's a harder thing to do. If there's less lag, you can be dancing in and out of the tower. You know you can dodge the tower shots nice and easily if you just move out of the way. Players got a lot better at dealing with situations involving towers as well, and the less lag definitely helps that out. So lag plays a huge role in making a tower strong, and now that we got less of it, well, it's another reason why tower rushing is a lot harder these days. Well, you might be thinking, okay, well that sucks. Now we just don't see towers in competitive play. That's actually not true either. It's actually a lot more interesting than that. Let me explain. Now, the use of towers in modern day Age of Empires is, in my opinion, a better version of the tower rush strategy that we saw a few years ago. And it's, in my opinion, once again, in a probably more healthy state now than it was before. Tower rushes now are being used as a way to secure ground in late feudal age. What you do now is you'd go for a standard feudal age opening, and once you get more army than your opponent, and maybe your opponent is like walling up and trying to get a faster castle age, then you go forward with a few villagers and then you start making the towers. This way your opponent will get a faster castle age time, but he can't really move out of his base because you've got towers around his important resources, and those are going to be pretty annoying. He's going to have to deal with them first before pushing out. So it's a way to lock down the ground, it's a way to extend your feudal age, and it's a way to really put the pressure on your opponent. And if he's disrespecting you in the feudal age, if he's greeting, not looking to fight you, you can force him to fight you by adding the towers forward. This adds a dynamic layer to feudal age in professional or competitive Age of Empires. This makes tournaments a lot more exciting to watch, because in the feudal age, usually if it's fully walled versus fully walled, not much happens if we go castle age. But with the idea that towers can be used to break walls or hit over walls, if one guy walls too dense or too tight around a small location of the map, the other guy just goes forward, few towers around all his important resources, and all of a sudden he's pinned, and yes, he's castle age, but he's got nowhere to go. This new use of towers made them a much more flexible building and a much more impactful rush once it actually comes through. Yes, you might not get the highest potential damage as opposed to just rushing right away with towers, but it's a lot less risky because nowadays you're only going forward if you have control of the map, and you actually get more value because you're attacking an opponent who is going to be weaker than you in some sense, because he's going to be either weak or on the defensive, or he's going to be either trying to go up the castle age where he's weaker for that moment because he spent 1,000 resources clicking the castle Castle Age upgrade, which hasn't really given him anything in exchange until he actually reaches Castle Age, which takes a couple minutes and a half. So this new version of the Tower Rush really spices up competitive AoE, and in my opinion, makes for a very healthy balance between Feudal Age and Castle Age, and gives you that chance to punish any greedy players. The last thing I will talk about when it comes to towers, and this one, it really is unfortunate for me because I think this, these kind of things have no place for competitive AoE, is the fact that there's the tower range mods, or even it's built into the game now. You get to see the tower range or the range around the towers, and this is true for all buildings. I really think this is bad for the game because now when your opponent builds a tower, you see exactly where that tower can hit. Normally it's a skill to be able to tell where the tower is hitting and how you want to play around it. Now you see exactly the radius it has. You build your base exactly around that radius, and that renders towers a lot less effective. Also, I've seen people just literally sit units exactly 8 range away from a tower, and they're still harassing all of your farms, all of your buildings or whatnot, and they're perfectly not taking any damage. I feel like I'm literally playing against an AI, and it's just such an unnatural thing to have in an RTS game. So I thought I'd mention it as something maybe a little controversial. I think people might like this mod or the setting, other people might not. I personally don't really like it for pro play. I think it should be removed from tournaments, but I don't feel that strongly about it. I don't use it personally for the same reasons. I'm gonna talk the talk and walk the walk, but I'm not obviously gonna complain if my opponent uses it as long as it's legal. And that's gonna do it, guys. That's been the Tower Rush summed up over the last few years. Let me know what you guys think about this topic, and let me know if you guys want to see more videos like this in the future. Thanks for watching, and check me out on Patreon, link in the description below if you want to support me further. Otherwise, comment, like the video, and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.